I grew up in Lima, Peru, very close to a historic center. And what you should know about the historic center is that there's always something to experience. You either have these beautiful public gardens with the smells of flowers and wood and fresh cut grass, or the smell of traditional sweets that are being sold in some corner somewhere, or the smell of incense, because there are so many churches, chapels, and cathedrals, so many, in fact, that it isn't unlikely that you will walk by one of them. So there are the smell of incense because there are so many churches and chapels and cathedrals, and so many, in fact, that it's unlikely that you wouldn't walk by one of them. But I grew up close to that, where the working class lives. On your way there, there's a bridge that you must walk over, where you can feel the sacred tension that the bridge holds historically. Because for the historic Lima to be beautiful and colorful, and for the smells of flowers and sweets and incense to be there, there is someone who must plant those flowers, bake those sweets, and burn that incense. And that's where I grew up, with the people who make all those things happen. But the smells and the sensations and the experiences across the bridge were not quite the same. Instead of flowers, you smell fumes from buses and cars that moved the masses to where they needed to go. The smell of garbage instead of sweets. The smell of piss instead of incense. It was not the Lima from across the bridge. But that's where home was. And at home, the matriarch, the absolute queen that was my grandma. We called her my mama. And as a child, probably 5 or 6, somewhere around there, I remember this figure waking up early every morning, starting her routine that involved creams and makeup for her face, and brushing and spraying her hair and her nails, trimming and filing and retouching her nail polish. And it was a whole production. And I don't think any of us really knew how many steps there were to it. But as the baby of the house, there was something that she made a point of sharing with me so that I would introduce it in my own routine. And that was to keep my nails clean. Being poor doesn't mean to be dirty. That's what she would say every time. And she was determined to teach every single one of her grandkids that where we came from was not going to define who we were. Hand washing was a ritual, sacred, important, because for her, and by extension, for us, that was always a way to defy who the world around us told us we were. I was probably 13 when my family decided to move to San Jose, Costa Rica. And the first impression you get when you are there is this very green, vibrant, fresh country. San Jose is in the middle of a valley. So you have all these smells of trees and soil and rain, which for someone born in the desert like myself was a daily delight. But here too, to keep the city clean and fresh and the smells of the forest could come through, all the other stuff had to go somewhere. I went to school in a city called Desamparados, and down the street from my school, there was a landfill, Rio Azul. And at first, as a 13-year-old, I just thought, well, trash does have to go somewhere. But then I started noticing that it wasn't just trash that went that direction. It was also people, families. It was also whole communities that lived among the trash and off of the waste that kept the rest of San Jose green and fresh and vibrant. They were my classmates. They were my friends. I remember going to school every morning and seeing this long road that went right into the landfill and seeing the crowds coming and going, kind of like a procession. It was another bridge, another sacred space holding the tension between the beauty of San Jose and the work and the people that took to keep it beautiful. Grandma died when I was 16, and I still remember that flight home. It was very tense, holy, it was endless. And the whole time, one of the few things that I could do to keep myself calm and composed and moving forward was to keep my fingernails clean. At 18, my family moved to Los Angeles, California. And at first, the very first thing that comes to mind when you think of LA is usually the Walk of Fame and the Hollywood sign, the lights and the crowds and the overpriced food, and to be quite frank, the overpriced everything in LA. It's glamour and beauty and success. It's a city of marketable people. But I didn't live in LA proper. I lived in North Hollywood. And to get to and from, you have to drive the 101, which became another bridge holding that sacred tension between the marketable people and the people who make them marketable. North Hollywood is one of those neighborhoods that feels dusty all the time, but it's also this unique crossroad of urban, suburban, and industrial. You constantly hear the noise of cars and trucks and planes coming and going from the Burbank airport and the nearby movie lots and warehouses. As I grew older, as I continued to move around, I continued to find more and more of these bridges holding sacred tension between what is and what makes them be. I am 39 years old now. And a big part of my vocation is to go over those bridges daily, sacred, and tense. When I hear about environmental racism, to me, it's not about this concept of an armchair discussion happening in the ivory tower of academia, but it's a part of my daily commute. Environmental racism is what creates the chasm those bridges are built for. Is the very nature of capitalism that creates those breaches. What keeps us separated. What puts the trash where we live so that others can visit the other side. What poisons and trashes our land so that others can live in it. It's what creates the us and them, while at the same time trying to make those bridges invisible, trying to erase that sacred tension and minimize the lives and stories of those who must cross them every day. We can see this pattern not just everywhere we go, but everywhere we are. I am now 39. I'm a pastor. And a big part of what I do is hold hands with people crossing those bridges. I still remember my mama telling me just because we're poor doesn't mean that we have to be dirty. But whenever I hold hands, whenever I get to serve someone, whenever I sit with them in those holy moments of tension, I look at their hands and at their nails, and regardless of if they're dirty or they're clean, regardless of nails or dirt or cuts, they all tell a story. Those hands and fingernails tell stories of dignity, of journeys, and of hard work. They tell our stories and are a living proof of our daily commute across those bridges.